Welcome to the Third Chair, a show about real people, real stories, real life. And here are your hosts for the Third Chair, Peter Grigg and Doug Bazeski.
Did you get the memo about who's coming back this week?
Well, it was last week's guest, so it's Bob VanCleave.
That's right. Sometimes I just don't put two and two together. But he shared some amazing stories of Alaska.
I learned so much.
Very spiritual, very moving experiences. And so Bob has worked with Alaskan natives, helping to address alcoholism and domestic violence. He's worked in social services in Colorado, and after a horrible car versus his bicycle, had a near-death out-of-body experience. Bob shares last week and also some this week how that profoundly changed his life. Please welcome Bob VanCleave. Welcome back to the Third Chair with our guest, Bob VanCleave. Peter and Doug, your co-hosts. Last week, Bob told us a bunch of Alaska stories, and so we're going to hit on a couple of other interesting areas of your life. So, your first degree was in musical theater.
Yeah, it was theater.
Musical theater.
Yeah.
Now, as we recall from last week, you were under in a situation where someone who is would describe as sort of your uncle in the Alaskan tribe had you stand up and sing a song for 600 people. Mm-hmm. It's a good thing you had that training in musical theater.
Yes.
Did you like performing?
Yes, I did, and I encouraged all of my children in some way, whether it be musical, theater, speaking. I think the performing arts are very important, not just to develop confidence, but to give you a sense of awareness of who you're speaking to. So, yeah, I came in as a theater major.
Wow. Yes, yeah. So that you have presence on the set.
That's exactly the term the director would say, your presence.
Yes.
Shakespeare.
Shakespeare, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And what I find also interesting is that kids that study music, also their brains develop differently, and they do better with like mathematics and science. And there's a lot.
Music is a discipline.
Yeah, music as a discipline has a lot of side value. Mm-hmm. Like, did you ever like want to like perform in something like Annie or any of those? I could see you as like a Daddy Warbucks. Would you get out there?
Oh yes.
Did you have to dance, Bob?
No, I didn't have to dance. I have thought about community theater in the past, but I have a lot of other things going on.
Yeah.
I enjoy performing. I enjoy theater.
Mm-hmm. And, perhaps we will add a clip to the show of you singing and dancing yet.
No. I decline.
Well, there goes that idea.
For your sake.
So we have photoshopped Bob onto a dancing Daddy Warbucks.
Did Daddy Warbucks dance in the movie?
Yeah, he does several times.
Well, he danced with Annie.
Yeah,
he danced with Annie. Oh, yes.
Yeah, several times.
Great. Actually, that's a great part. It'd be a great part to play.
That would be. And it certainly pays better than our guest fee for the podcast. Yeah, and so then, and so you switch gears. You become involved in counseling, therapy, helping people with alcoholism. And I know you worked at the Department of Institutes, is it?
Institutions, yes.
Yeah, now is that part of the government or is that a...
Yes.
No, so that's a part of the government.
Yeah, institutions include a number of types of institutions. The one I spent more time with was developmental disabilities.
Wow.
Profoundly handicapped, multiple physical handicaps.
Yeah, and you also spent some time in corrections, is that right?
Yes.
Am I correct?
Yeah.
That you're in corrections?
Yeah, I did some time in correction, and I did a prison ministry as well.
Oh, wow. So you did a nickel in... No. That's prison lingo for a 5-year sentence. And...
Now he spent his 5 years in Alaska.
Yeah, boy. Well, that could be either. Some people might view that as a sentence, and some people may view that as freedom.
Yeah, and I'm not going to digress into that, but we only came back because we thought it was important that our children be more well-rounded, and when you're isolated, as most people are in the interior of Alaska, you don't have a real good perspective on what's happening in the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to just change the direction up here a little bit, and this may bleed over to the second segment, pardon the pun, but in between your comings and goings to Alaska, you were involved in a horrible bike accident where you're almost killed. You had an out-of-body experience. So let me just ask a couple questions about that. First of all, did you have an experience, like these guys that write 60 minutes in heaven or 15 minutes in heaven? Was there a seeing of sort of a heavenly place or a bright light or anything like that as part of this experience?
The short answer is no to that part of it, but at the moment of the accident, I recalled thinking that I could not feel a pain that I felt without dying. I remember
the pain was so bad.
It was that I didn't think I could survive that. I thought I knew what pain was. Evidently, I didn't. And then when I was picked up, in a sense, by the ambulance off the road, I was in the back of the ambulance, and they were calling in my vitals, and I saw myself laying on the gurney, and I was floating above, and I could hear the vitals being called in, and I was dying. My blood pressure was going down, and I thought, well, but I wasn't really afraid. And then the next thing I know, I woke up in somewhere where they were tearing my clothes off.
That's reported. That's reported fairly commonly of people floating above, and then somehow, I guess, the paramedics came back, or people that
or you don't come back.
Yeah,
and it wasn't a frightening experience. I remember looking at myself and knowing that was me, but my spirit wasn't in that body. I was above the in the ceiling of the ambulance, I guess you'd say.
So. You were riding a bicycle and someone was driving a car. Do you remember the details of that to this day? Of, were you going down the hill and someone going up the hill, or did they smack you from behind, or what happened?
Well, it was both the ride to and from work, 28 miles. And then the ride home, I remember before the accident, I passed a policeman or a patrolman, and he had radar. Well, that was kind of funny. On my bicycle, I'm not going to be speeding, but fortunately, he was that close. And yes, I was going down a very steep hill, fast as my bicycle would go, and I was accustomed to riding it that way. A car was coming up the hill, and I saw stopped in a turn lane. And then the last I recall, I heard the engine on the car roar, and I said, "Oh my God!"
So she was accelerating into you.
Well, yeah, and I don't think she saw me. And then she became hysterical when she saw me laying on the pavement. And
you remember flying through the air?
Oh yes,
bouncing off things.
Yes, I remember putting my arm up and went through the side window, and then I flew over the top of the car, bouncing on the asphalt. I did have a helmet on, but I was torn up because I had shorts on and that kind of thing. I was a mess.
Oh wow!
I was, and then I spent a long time in rehab. So that, but I came away from that. I didn't have a sense of resentment. I thought I would. I thought I'd be angry because she skipped out on it. She skipped out.
She took off.
She took off.
Did the cops get her?
She didn't take off then, but she skipped out on all the payment of the medical expenses.
Oh my goodness, yeah. So that could have left you pretty bitter, resentful, angry, frustrated. You can jump in there if you want to add a few other words.
I didn't know how to react. But then Dr. Sonata, I worked for a psychiatrist who was the head of the institution where I worked. And I had already turned in my resignation. I was leaving in a week. And I went in and told him after I got out of the hospital, I was in the hospital for a while, and I said, there's a different feeling lying in bed, looking up at people, treating you, as opposed to standing, looking down at people. And he said that was probably a lesson that I never could have learned another way. And then he said, I'd like to allow you to withdraw your resignation so that your expenses can be covered.
So your medical insurance was good.
So it was good again.
Oh wow, what a kind thing for that man to do.
I'll never forget him.
Yeah, boy. And when we come back from our break, we're going to ask you the question: did this have any sort of impact spiritually on your life in terms of what you wanted to do or how you wanted to live? I mean, you talked about the experience with the Indians when you saw, after someone had died, people were very kind and they had a payback kind of a ceremony and culture. Did this influence you in terms of how you decided to live your life? And that is the question for you, Bob, when we come right back. We'll get back to our guest in just a moment. But
Do you have a story to tell?
would you, yes you, like to be a guest on the third chair?
Send us an email and tell us about yourself and your story.
And please follow us on social media.
Now back to the episode.
Welcome back to the third chair with our special guest, Bob VanCleave, with Doug and Peter, your co-hosts. When we left off, we asked the question, after you were in this horrible accident driving down a hill on a bicycle and another lady that took one look at you and accelerated and smacked you, and you almost died, you had an out-of-body experience, you get better, it's months later, reflecting on it, how did it change you? What kinds of things did it make you think about?
How fragile life is. That's what, and the personal experience was how easily your health can be taken away from you, how quickly it happens, and how long the recovery is.
Oh my goodness.
That's what I recall is it happened in a moment, and then it was months, maybe years, in the recovery process. So that was a month or two before I went to Alaska with still recovering. And that theme continued there, how fragile life was.
I mean, did you see like catastrophes, tragedies?
Fairly frequently, yes. Boating accidents, homicides, suicides, airplanes going down, people being intoxicated, falling down outside and hitting their head, freezing to death, running their boat onto a rock. I mean, it was, you realized that you should never, don't waste a moment. Don't waste a moment that you have an opportunity to do something of value. And that was the beginning of that was that accident when I thought, my life could have been taken from me, and I'm determined that I'm going to make use of whatever time I have left.
Now, I'm not sensing that you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, like don't do stuff. Don't stop riding your bike, don't stop flying your plane, don't stop driving your boat, but just do it safely and not to waste time in this lifetime.
It's not to waste time. No, goodness, I've remained at least as active as I ever have been, and I have taken chances. I try to be more measured in the chances that I take where I think I could be injured or lose my life. But I think I value life, and it's precious to me, the days and years that we have on this earth.
Was there a sense of changing your goals for your life after this occurred? Was there ever, I'm just making some up, I want to go to India and work at Mother Teresa's orphanage after this experience? Was there any kind of either insight or epiphany? There's a big word, epiphany. Epiphany's good. It's a good Scrabble word. Yeah.
It's the word of the day. Doug's going to put it down here.
Yeah.
Epiphany, yeah.
Epiphany's a good word, yeah. I don't know if I had an epiphany, but I know it was life-changing. And there is a saying about Alaska that once you've been to Alaska, you never come all the way back. And that was true of me. It was true of my wife, too. It's not something you ever completely forget. It was a little different than a mission trip, as an example. I've been on mission trips.
Yeah, you've been all over.
Yeah, I've been on mission trips, so and then those are important. But this was being immersed in a culture, and it changed me. It caused me to value life and relationships far more than I used to. And they are a priority now, I think.
Now, on the break, we talked about one other thing that I really thought was interesting that you said, and I'm going to bring it up, and that is you found that you managed to get through the crash experience without being bitter or angry with the lady that was involved, even though she probably deserved a lot of bad things to happen to her. How did that happen? How do you go through life undergoing a tragedy that's someone else's fault, or maybe you have a small part of it, and on the other side, not let it destroy you with resentment?
Peter, that may have happened to me were it not for Dr. Sonata and my coworkers. I had coworkers that came in to the hospital holding my hand, and the outpouring of love and affection and caring carried me through that. You know, I had little time to be bitter because people were caring for me, and I've not forgotten that. At a time of my greatest need, people who had not especially been forthcoming in any kind of feelings about me stepped up. They came to the hospital. They visited me. In fact, I just had a woman call me within the last week, one of my former workers, to see how I was.
Wow.
I was stunned. And that carried over to Alaska. I think, if I may, and I'm moving into more of the area of relationships, but there are a couple of, not quotes, but there are a couple of elements in a book by Oswald Chambers I've read, My Utmost, for his highest. And it's about not being too harsh or judging people. And he said, there's always one more thing about someone that you don't know. I don't care how well you know them, but there's always one more thing you don't know. And the second then is about discernment. And he said, the greatest challenge that can be given a person is one who's been given significant discernment, because discernment can easily translate into judgment, to evaluating and judging people's behavior. So I've carried those thoughts with me, and how I was treated at my point of weakness, at a tremendous point of my dream had been blown up, and it was clear I was not going to be riding my bicycle to Alaska, but I was cared for I was nurtured through that so that I did not become bitter, and that carried over into Alaska.
Now, I'm going to just piggyback on this just a little bit, because we often hear about, the onus is on you to forgive people and that sort of thing, so you don't develop resentment and bitterness, and that's true, and that's right, and that's correct.
Yeah.
God, as a matter of fact, Jesus says, forgive one another.
You must.
You must, yeah.
You must.
But what I find a little bit revolutionary, maybe revolution's a bad word to use, enlightening about what you're saying is you're also saying, though, that it was the actions and the love of others choosing to be involved that help create space, if you will, so that you didn't become bitter. And that's a really interesting way to look at it. It's like, my actions when somebody else has something bad happen to them can prevent them from being in a worse place.
I think so.
It kind of puts, the responsibility on your neighbor. Like, that whole love your neighbor thing. I know it's written in some book somewhere. I don't remember which one. Yeah.
As yourself. Yes. Well, that's a big one too. Loving your neighbor as yourself. That's quite a challenge.
Love your neighbor as yourself. And then Jesus went a step further, which totally blew it out of the water. He says, "A new commandment I give you: love one another as I have loved you."
Ooh.
It's like, because you may not love yourself, so that it's easy to love someone in a bad way if you don't care about you. Yeah. Well, so what we'll do, we're going to go to a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to continue this conversation to find out some other areas of your life, Bob, when we come back to the third chair with our guest, Bob VanCleave. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the third chair, where we're with our guest Bob VanCleave, and we're going to talk about your family, Bob. And we mentioned slightly your wife before, but you also have 4 kids.
Have children,
Or children, I guess they're grown up.
Yeah, they're all adults now.
What was the hardest part of raising these 4?
I think the most difficult thing for me was not them, is dealing with myself. And that is giving them an opportunity to live their lives and not trying to live through them. And because I've had a lot of experiences, not all positive, I sometimes want to rescue them from some of the trouble they're going to get into.
And every parent's dilemma.
And frankly, I think when I've done that, I've complicated things. I haven't helped necessarily. Sometimes you do, but what I have begun to learn, I haven't got it down perfectly, is to allow them to experience life as they see it, because I did, and then to be there, to be their backstop, if I can say it that way.
Yeah, I'm sure your parents were thrilled when you quit your job twice. The one time to go to Europe and or bicycle to Alaska. Or one time going to
When I look
Alaska.
back at that, I can't even imagine if one of my kids said that to me. And what are you going to do there? I said, I don't know. I don't have a job. You crazy? So maybe I was, but I think.
But it worked out, right?
But they stayed by me. There was a loyalty that was ingrained in me from my parents that I've tried to pass on to my children. They stayed by me through years of foolishness, and I made some mistakes, and they hung with me, and I'll never forget that.
And yet you're still here. You made mistakes. You're still here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's the most challenging part of being a husband? Boy, this is an interesting question.
That's your $64,000 question.
I think Doug wrote that one.
Yeah, wow. The most difficult thing, I think, is as I look back. Now, going in, I didn't have that. Looking back, I think really understanding that we're two different people, and we come from two different places. My wife is an immigrant from another country, another culture. I came from a very rural and fairly poor background. Very, very different. And not just saying, yes, I understand we're different people, but really recognizing how different our upbringing was, how different the cultures were that we were raised in, and respecting that, and not just constantly trying to change one another.
Good.
Yeah.
Now, you and your wife grew up with different religious beliefs and denominations.
Yes.
And at that time, that was really a challenge.
That was more of a challenge than I thought it was going to be. I think it would be fair to say that I grew up in a family that had a certain amount of prejudice, specifically against Roman Catholics. And they were my parents were good people, loving people, kind people, but they didn't know anything about people of another denomination. And when they saw some of their rituals, I think they were afraid of that. It caused them to be fearful. And so my wife is a European Catholic, not just Catholic, but very traditional Italian family. And I was smitten with her. I was attracted to her. And I knew nothing about her upbringing. Mm-hmm. I mean, nothing. Naivete about what her parents had gone through. Her father was in Italy during the time of Mussolini. And that's a world that I never lived in. And
luckily, a lot of us haven't.
Yeah, we didn't. And I had incredible respect for their family, and my parents did too. By the way, when they found out, as an example, that they had come across on a steamship through Ellis Island, and the not speaking the language, and when my parents understood what they had gone through, I think they were humbled, and had a deep love for my wife's family and my wife. So it worked both ways. And as I was sharing with Peter earlier, as much as you think you know someone, there's always one thing more you don't know about them. You think you know them, you question why they do something, and the truth is you really don't know what they've gone through in their life, day to day. You really, you know, you've heard stories about their their rearing and their family, but you didn't live in their life, and they didn't live in yours. And so I've learned to have an appreciation, I hope a sensitivity for the fears and weaknesses of other people.
Now, you got married in a Roman Catholic church. What did your family think about having to go to a...
Well, I was, I hasten to point out that I was not a young man. And so my parents were relieved that I was finally going to settle down.
Oh, so you're what, like 34, 35?
Yeah, 34, 35.
Yeah.
I was 37 and we got married, and so was my wife.
Yeah.
And neither one of our parents had a problem. They didn't complain or anything.
No, my parents didn't complain.
About time. Get it.
It was like, oh, good.
Yeah. You're getting married.
Doug even went to Las Vegas and had the Elvis wedding.
But
He went to Las
my
Vegas.
parents flew to Colorado to meet my wife's parents, and I think it was a powerful emotional experience for them to learn about their lives and what they had endured in coming to this country. And so that worked exceedingly well. But in different religions, yes. And we did get married in a cathedral in Trinidad, Colorado. As a matter of fact, the priest that we knew in Alaska, who I lived with,
Oh, wow.
we flew him down here to do the ceremony. Unbeknownst to him and unbeknownst to us, things had not necessarily changed as much as what we were experiencing in Alaska. He was, I would say in those days they called it charismatic. I would say all denominations in Alaska were charismatic or Pentecostal. If you want to use that term, but I would say charismatic. So I had a large number of my family invited, coming from thousands of miles away to this wedding. Frankly, I think it's because it was in Colorado, and maybe it was. They came. You know, they weren't that close, cousins, and came to this wedding. And I would say because my wife was the youngest and she's the last to be married in her family. I believe it could be fair to say it was a tradition to invite everybody in the community. And so it was an enormous turnout. And, this priest was Monsignor Miller, Father Miller, did the service, but the significance, and I think that's what you may be looking for, we'd gone through the actual vows and that kind of thing, and then there was going to be a communion service. If you can reflect back 40 years ago, it probably wasn't acceptable for people in different denominations to experience Holy Communion. And I remember him standing up in front, and I wasn't prepared for this. I think my wife thinks that he cleared it with a bishop somewhere, but he simply said, "I understand there are people here from different churches and different denominations, and if you," he gave what I would call a basic altar call. If you believe in Jesus Christ, came to earth, suffered, died, buried, gone to him, kind of returned again, born of a Virgin Mary, with the whole thing. We did that quickly in about a minute. He said, "You're welcome to join us for communion."
Yeah, that was very...
I was standing in front looking out at my family. Stunned. Uncomfortable, and I assumed people in the community, but not stunned, disagreeing. This man was a holy man, and people could see that in his face, and there was never a question of is it okay? There was never a question of
Wow.
He just said it and did it, and everybody joined in. And then Of course, it's Trinidad, Colorado. I say that with love. It was a huge wedding dance.
And we're going to talk about that when we come right back. Hi, I'm Dr. Peter Grigg, a life and recovery coach with Pikes Peak Recovery Coaching. I've had the pleasure and privilege of helping people for over 25 years. I want to hear your story, support and encourage you while we partner together to help you reach your goals. I can help you. I am certain I can help you. I can be your guide, role model, resource person, and help you get results. What's my coaching frameworks? I'm an eclectic coach drawing from a variety of disciplines and frameworks with evidence-based proven methods. What would you like to work on? Some popular areas are goal setting and attainment, building and maintaining motivation, finding purpose, personal development, recovery from drug and alcohol addiction problems, health and wellness, life planning, athletic and creative artist performance enhancement, maybe something else. Just ask me. I would love to help you. You can find my services on Fiverr.com.
Welcome back to another session of The Third Chair with Bob VanCleave. And you were telling us about your wedding, and you had a wedding dance that you said was interesting. So,
well, the wedding was interdenominational, and I think the level of celebration was probably something that surprised even my family. Though my family would celebrate weddings, and this was a wonderful wedding dance. My in-laws really prepared almost all of the food. The salami, the ravioli,
food that's hard to eat.
It was all prepared, and I would say, because that's part of their culture, my father-in-law prepared the wine as well.
Oh,
and
wow.
So it was band, it was music, they had lots and lots of food, hundreds and hundreds of people, and they danced. And my parents were dancers too, to be honest with you. Enjoyed it, so that was a big deal for them. Everybody, and that included the priest, and that I think did surprise both sides of the family.
It probably was a little surprising.
Well, as I understand it, he was from Minnesota, and it was a very, like, polkas and things like that. He would get out there and dance, and he danced with my wife. He danced, I think, with the bride's mother and the groom's mother, and
he danced with all.
Oh yeah, he was an active individual, and never with a sense of judgment or guilt. Always with this wonderful smile on his face. He was a happy man.
He's like jogging out there and moving. Right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So that was.
Was he a better dancer than you?
I think he could dance better what he was doing than I was. I used to think I was a good dancer, but probably was not. But there was just a lot of people and joy and happiness, and that's my recollection. And that includes my family. It was a joyful experience. And
churches of different denominations can get along.
That's right. Yes. And it has something to do with the leadership, I think, but it has mostly to do with what is in people's hearts. That's
maybe the wine helped. Maybe that's why Jesus turned the water into wine.
I don't know. Maybe
he was Italian.
Now, throughout your life, you've done social work, and I understand you once arranged a conference on fatherhood. What was that about? How did that come about?
I came back from Alaska, and by the way, I worked for a time at Denver General. I was a director of training there and taught classes on death and dying to the emergency room docs and nurses. Powerful emotional experience. At the time, it was becoming popular to talk about sexual harassment. I did that training. Then I moved to Colorado Springs, and I was the deputy and then the director of the Department of Social Services. Part of what social services does is to care for and house and take custody of children. Some abused, some neglected for a variety of reasons. But often it has to do with absent fathers. And it became clear that was true in our community as well. Didn't mean all the fathers were bad people. It's just that they weren't as actively involved with their children as perhaps they could have been or should have been. So we scheduled a conference on fathering. I invited, and he attended, Paul Harvey, Dr. Joyce Brothers were there. Paul Harvey was the keynote speaker.
Big names from the 70s.
Yeah, it was. Paul Harvey was, and I had the privilege of meeting him, going to the airport, picking me up, meeting with him in his room at the Broadmoor. And he is a very active supporter of fathers. And the way this came about was there was a movement in California called the Royal Family Kids Camp. Okay, I didn't know what that was. I was approached by a large church here in Colorado Springs, the Radiant Church, and I was told that they would be willing to fund a summer camp for 40 kids, no cost. No cost of any kind. They'd staff it. They would do everything. And I was tasked with talking to our Board of County Commissioners about that, because it was the church who was recommending it. And they were concerned about favoritism and proselytizing and that kind of thing. And so I sent 4 of my staff to that summer camp. They staffed it 1-on-1. There was 40 kids. Every one of them had an individual counselor. It happened for a number of years, and I believe had a profound effect on the people from that church. I don't know what the effect I had on the children, although they loved. It was like an adopted uncle or aunt, and so they loved them. And so that was the Center on Fathering. That was the conference on fathering, and we opened, and I believe it still exists, a Center on Fathering that emphasized the importance of a male figure in a child's life. So does not diminish the role of women at all, but it was a recognition that men can do and probably should be involved.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think the more point of views a child gets, the better they were prepared to make decisions.
Yeah, and I think what they learn the role models, and if their father is not involved, the tendency is for them to not be as involved as maybe they should. So anyway, it was a very successful experience, and I can tell you that I stay in contact with one of the mothers. Just sent me a note one night ago about she's on a mailing list for messages that I send out, and she and I correspond. That's how many years ago that goes back. That goes back to 35 years ago, and we're both senior citizens now, and she hasn't forgotten, and her child was one of those.
Yeah. And speaking of kids, you also set up a camp for Royal Rangers kids.
That's what I was referring to. It's called Royal Family Kids Camp, and that was the summer camp experience for those kids. Would never have had a summer camp experience. Would never have been able to afford it. and it was the Boy Scout camp north of Woodland Park. Is where it took place. Took place a number of years in a row, and it was funded 100% by this particular church. So, and staffed. So I think it became a model, and it is gone in other places in the country. We didn't start it. It really, I was told, it was started in California.
So,
yeah.
And we'll wrap up the show when we come back after our break.
We sure hope you're enjoying this episode of The Third Chair.
Would you like to be a sponsor for the Third Chair?
We would love to have you join us to keep the show going and also help your business. Send us an email about your product or company and let's talk.
And follow us on social media.
Now back to The Third Chair.
Yes.
Welcome back to The Third Chair with our guest, Rob VanCleave. Bob VanCleave. Do you go by Rob or Bob these days?
Both.
You go by both.
Both, yes.
Rob and
So
Bob.
sometimes when I'm introducing when someone says Rob, they call me Rob or Robert, Bob.
You can call him anything you want, just don't call him Leif today.
I was just going to say
Yeah,
that
for the
there is-
seal meat, yes.
Yeah.
Especially if there's seal served.
Yeah, seal served. I like that. So we're just down the last few moments, Bob, and one thing I wanted to ask you about is I know you lead and facilitate a men's morning topical Bible study. You come up with some of the ideas of what to cover. A question. You once told me part of the reason you did it was because you were tired of people complaining about their pastor and their denomination. Elaborate on that a little bit.
I think that I think it's natural to point a finger at persons in positions of leadership and authority.
Mm-hmm.
And my personal belief is that it has to do with the content of each individual's heart.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not about passing judgment about a particular pastor or a particular denomination. going on 15 years ago, 3 men and I began having coffee on Thursday morning, talking about politics and sports and gossip, basically. We determined that what might be a good idea for somebody to bring a Bible verse. Long story short, people would forget, and finally I said, okay, I'll do it. And it's not a Bible study, it's topical. It's men living their lives based on Scripture. And that's what it's about. Each Sunday afternoon, I send out a message to dozens and dozens of people now, hundreds. Started with 4. Occasionally 1 or 2 people drop off, but I pick up people all the time. Military persons in other countries, missionaries, men, women. I've had a number of men in my group pass away, and their wives are still on the mailing list. I have women all over the United States who are recipients of a message I send out. The group meets every Thursday morning.
Wow. Do you take guests? And if someone wanted to check out your group, now we're here in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and how would they contact you? Can we put your email on the screen?
It would be fine. I don't mind. This is an interdenominational, non-denominational group. It doesn't have anything to do with a specific church, not limited to that. Or if someone doesn't have any church affiliation, that's fine.
Yeah, and you typically meet at a restaurant, and so there's
we
food involved.
Yes, we eat. We meet beginning at 8 o'clock every Thursday morning. We eat, and then the program starts, probably about an hour and a half discussion. I used to be concerned, Peter, about how successful it might be, or if people would find it interesting. And then I quickly realized it's not about me. This is not about me. So I just turned it over to the Lord and said, it's in your hands. And 14, 15 years now, it's carried on, and we have a regular group that meets. We don't have hundreds that meet. We have probably a group of 8 or 10 or 12 people that get together every Thursday morning.
And I'd like to say, too, that it's not about dieting, because I've seen what you guys order. and it's a very hearty meals.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
very
we do.
hearty meals, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, well, good. Yeah, feed the soul and feed the belly.
Yeah.
Both are good.
And I think it's an incredibly wonderful opportunity for an outreach to waitstaff.
Mm-hmm.
We have waitstaff that listen, and they don't take part typically because they're waiting on tables, but other
You
patrons.
never know who's watching and listening.
We've had a number of people who are on the mailing list now, who have expressed interest, and they
Good.
have.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for being with us tonight, Bob, and
Thank you,
being
Bob.
with us last week. And so we're going to wrap up, and we would encourage you to like, subscribe, share, and hit the notification icon so you can be informed every time we drop a new episode, which we drop on Thursday evenings. Thank you, and for everyone here from the third chair, I got it right this time, and 2 Men and a Duck Entertainment, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
This has been the third chair. Want to be a guest? Want to sponsor our show? Send us an email. Please subscribe to our channel and follow us on social media.